Hello, everyone. This is Deborah Owen calling with Einstein's Secret, and I am very excited to be able to introduce you today to Kathy Turner, who is a high school French teacher for the town of Sharon, Massachusetts. And she was the Teacher of the Year for the state of Massachusetts up through 2013. And Sharon, welcome. We're happy to have you here with us today.
Hi, thank you very much.
Oh, Sharon, I'm sorry. Sharon,
Yeah.
Massachusetts, and Kathy. That's right. Yeah, I knew that. Yeah, thank you so much for joining us. Why don't you start by telling us a little bit about your background and how you got to teaching French in Sharon, and a little bit about being what it's been like to be Teacher of the Year this past year.
Okay. I grew up in Northridge, Massachusetts, a small town about 20 minutes south of Worcester.
Hmm.
And I always had kind of an odd obsession with all things French, and I don't know why, because there's no French in my background. There's a tiny bit of French Canadian, but there were roots, but we never identified with that as a family.
Hmm.
So I can't quite explain why on the first day of eighth grade, when I sat in, we had an exploratory program where we would have a third of the year of French, a third of the year of Spanish, a third of the year of Latin, so that we could choose our language for the following year.
Right.
The first day of French class, I sat down and thought, oh my God, I love this. The teacher didn't speak anything but French, and he was jumping around, and I didn't understand a word that he was saying. But he gestured, he danced, he drew, and I went home and told my parents that I would be a high school French teacher.
Wow.
So yeah, so my students are like, really? On the first day of eighth grade, you knew that? And I just did. So I took French all through high school, and then I majored in French at Harvard. And while I was at Harvard, I did the undergraduate teacher education program, which allowed me to take all of my teacher prep courses. And that was before the ed reform of '94. So I sort of got in on under the wire for not having to. I got the lifetime certification, which
Oh,
ended
okay.
up not being the lifetime certification. But
Right.
um, the and I student taught at Westwood High School. And in about March of that year, someone said, "Hey, did you hear that the French teacher in Sharon is going to be retiring?" And so I applied, and he had been there forever. And I thought, oh, I'll never get this. And I did. So I was pretty secure.
That's
By May of my senior year of college, I knew that I would be teaching French in Sharon the following September. So I walked out of college and into Sharon High, and that's where I've been for 20 years.
oh, that's fantastic. That doesn't
I
happen
love
all that often anymore, does it?
it. No, no, not at all. So, yeah, I have loved every minute of being in Sharon, and the French program is really strong, and that is kind of rare because in many schools, both in Massachusetts and across the country, French is kind of taking a downward turn because of Spanish, because of now
Right.
there are a lot of schools offering Chinese,
Hmm.
but we have managed to hold our own, and we have almost as many students taking French as we do Spanish,
Good.
uh, which we're super proud of.
Yep.
And so I was kind of going along doing my thing when about a year and a half ago, my department head said to me in late January, I was thinking of nominating you for Teacher of the Year. And I said, she said, what do you think about that? And I said, I don't know, I guess. And I didn't really know anything about it. I had vaguely remembered hearing every year there was an announcement of someone as the Teacher of the Year, but I didn't really know what that all meant.
Right.
So I said, yeah, sure, fine. And then the next day I got the packet of application material in the mail, and I spent all of that February vacation, about 5 12-hour days, writing the essays required for that
Oh,
application,
wow.
which ranged from biographical information and how I got to where I was, and what my philosophy on teaching was, because this was broader than it wasn't just for language teachers,
Hmm.
it was education
Right.
in general. So, what problems did I see in public education, and how would I solve those problems and limit me to 2 pages, which was a challenge.
Yeah.
So I submitted that, and then about a month later, I heard from the Department of Education that I had made it to the next round. And for the next round, I had to videotape myself teaching and submit an unedited 30-minute video of myself and my class, and then analyze that and get some additional letters of recommendation.
Okay.
And then I made it through that, and the next month I for the last stage, the 5 or 6 finalists had a 40-minute interview in front of 10 educators from across the state. And then I found out that I had won.
Wow. Congratulations. That's quite an ordeal.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a lot of work, but definitely worth it.
You know, I have to say, I'm actually starting to work on national board certification, and there are a lot of similarities between the two, between the writing and the videotaping of your class. And we don't have to do an interview, but yeah, there's still a lot of
That's what I've heard.
similarities.
Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's terrific. Congratulations.
Thanks.
And I bet your students were pretty excited for you.
Oh, they were thrilled. They
Yeah,
were so excited.
yeah.
And the Department of Ed started a new tradition that year, which was to have an all-school pep rally for me at my high
Nice.
school. So the all 1,200 students and all the faculty members, and I got to invite my family and some close friends, and the band played and the chorus sang, and there were representatives from the State House there, and the Hannaford Supermarkets was one of the sponsors that year,
Okay.
so they were there. It was the whole hullabaloo. So everyone was really excited.
That's great. That's great. Well, as a fellow Massachusetts person, I'm really excited to be able to have this opportunity to chat with you about this. This is terrific. So, because I've been talking with teachers from around the country, and
Right.
it's great to be able to talk to the Massachusetts Teacher of the Year,
Yes.
since that's where I live and teach. So, that's
And
great.
where do you teach?
I'm at Hudson High School.
That's in high school. Okay.
Yeah, yeah, and I live in Stowe. So my kids have been going through the Neshoba School District.
Oh, okay.
So yeah, yeah. Well, let's dive into it a little bit in terms of what is it that you know, some of the best. I ask all of the teachers some of these questions, and I would love to know from you what do you do that really helps to motivate your students? Can you share what you do that you've found to be most successful in terms of motivating your students?
Um, I think in the classroom, it's about treating students, this may sound weird, but treating them like people, and people who have their whole life is not my French class, as much as I would love that to be the case.
Uh-huh.
And understanding that everyone has a story, and that when students come to school every day, they're bringing with them the what happened with their family, what happened with their friends, what happened with their pets, what happened with the driving test, what happened with the college application, what happened with someone being ill. And there's so many things that impact how well a student is going to be able to function in class every day. And I think that students have commented to me through the years that they really appreciate my ability to recognize the fact that they are a whole person, and that I can kind of be flexible to their moods and to where they are, and kind of adapt to that every day while keeping my standards high and while holding them accountable. So I think that there's this level of respect that I have established with students that trickles down into they do the work.
Mm-hmm.
They're engaged to do the work. It's a hard balance to achieve sometimes. I'm not your friend, but I'm friendly to you, and they understand that, and that motivates them to do work because they want to please me and they want to please themselves, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, yeah.
And I think that my class is fun. I think elementary school teachers are amazing, and I would never be an elementary school teacher. But the beauty of teaching high school languages is that the students actually are only at the level of a little kid in terms of being able to communicate.
Mm-hmm.
So I get to do all of the fun singing, dancing, playing games, because that's linguistically where they are,
Right.
in terms of being able to communicate. So I
Right.
think that a lot of students have said that they love coming to class every day because they don't know what kind of crazy thing we're going to do. And they can kind of let themselves be little kids again in some way while they're still in their 15-year-old body that they don't quite understand. So I think that I try not to do the same thing every day,
Mm-hmm.
so that they're practicing communication, which is useful for the real world in the context of this other language, while having fun.
That's great. So it sounds to me like in addition to keeping things new and fresh on a daily basis, another huge part of motivating students is really based all on relationships and the relationships
It's
that
all
you've
about
cultivated.
relationships.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah,
And then that, since it's been 20 years, that, and the relations that trickles down into families. I was actually counting the other day. I've had a number of families where I've had 2, 3, and 4 kids of the same family who have gone through.
yeah.
So that kind of trickles down, and so they come in knowing, oh, this is a person who I'm going to, I'm going to like being in this class, and I'm going to be, this person is going to care about me.
They already come in with good expectations.
Good expectations, right?
Yeah, yeah. That's great. That's great. Yeah, I think that's one of my mantras also is that life in general is all about relationships, and particularly when you're trying to teach, and especially when you're trying to teach kids, I think. So as you narrow it down, it gets more and more important to really focus on developing positive, supporting, trusting relationships. So
And I think in addition to what happens in the classroom and being flexible to who they are, I've made a huge effort through the years to go to the soccer game, the basketball game, the play, the concert chorus, so that I see students where they are demonstrating their talents outside of French class, and they see me being supportive of their interests, which also has that trickle down effect to the classroom.
sure.
And by doing that, then I can, in the classroom, I can say, so, hey, you were great in that game, or hey, oh, that play was amazing, oh, your voice is incredible.
Right.
And I can get, the other piece is, because in language, the goal is to be speaking, and we can talk about anything. So, I start the Monday mornings with, so what did you do this weekend? What did you do? So they kind of are, part of the point of the course is sharing stuff about their lives, which also further tightens that bond that we have.
That's great. That's great. That's a great benefit of being a language teacher.
Yeah, as long as you're speaking in the language,
You can talk about anything.
you can talk about anything.
Yeah, my son was taking German for several years, and his German teacher's the same way. We'll talk about anything as long as you do it in German.
Exactly.
That's right. That's right. Well, tell us a little bit about what are some of the things that bring you great joy when you're in your teaching.
It can be really simple things like, uh, last week I had a student move to Sharon after school had started, and she's in my French 1 class. And she's been struggling, in part because she came in 3 weeks into the year and trying to get adapted to Sharon, which is very different from where she had come from. And we're learning numbers, so very basic, and we were doing an activity where I had Xeroxed a page from a French phone book, and given in pairs, the students had to ask each other, well, what's so and so's phone number, and the partner would have to find it on on the sheet, and then dictate the phone number back, and then compare to see that the person had actually written down the phone number. And this girl, as she went back to her seat, just said, "That was so helpful. I think I get it now." And I was like, "Oh,
That's
so
great.
great."
That's
It's
great.
so simple, like nothing earth-shattering, but that just made the rest of my day, because I felt like, wow, I did something that made learning easier for this student. It may, for at least that period.
Right.
And I love I love those moments of the aha, I got it, or this is interesting. I love when the bell rings and they say, really, class is over? Because I've been able to hold their attention for 57 minutes.
That's not an easy thing to do.
No, no. I love the letters that I have gotten from students, after they graduate, to say that they've continued with their French, to say that they've traveled, to say that they are in France, to say that even though they didn't continue French, the life lessons that they learned in my class have stayed with them. Out of the blue, last spring, I got an email from a former student who's, I think, a junior in college this year, to say that he was thinking about one particular lesson about the Little Prince that we had done, and he had remembered in really specific detail about, it was a hot day in the spring, and it was during the lunch block, and I don't know how you managed to keep our attention, but the questions that you were asking about the philosophical nature of that book were so fascinating. And I just was like, Oh, wow. Because a lot of times as a teacher, you don't know in the immediate if you're making a difference or what your impact is. And then to get a letter like that 2 or 3 years after the fact, where it had made such an impact on it that he was able to so clearly describe the whole setting, was just so, it was really moving.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. That's
so,
great.
and the other thing that makes me so happy is that I travel with students and I'm able to bring the language and the culture of what we're studying in the classroom alive for them. Um, and so when I got to Sharon in the fall of '94, there had been no one had ever traveled, which surprised me because Sharon is a pretty upper middle class-ish town, and I was surprised that because students would have the means to
That they
travel,
hadn't
that
done it.
they hadn't done it because
Yeah.
in my little town of Northbridge, where people really didn't have the means, we did travel. My teachers did travel with us, and we found a way to make it work. Um, so I said, well, you have to travel. And one of my colleagues said, oh, the school committee will never approve that. And I said, well, we're going to try. So, and the school committee approved it. So since 1996, I have traveled with students every second year to Paris during April vacation. And to be able, and there are some students who have traveled with their families. There are some students who have never left the country. There are students who've never left the state. One of the students who traveled with me last April had never been on a plane. So to be able to bring that kind of experience to a 16, 17-year-old is unbelievable. And to walk around Paris and show them like, oh, wow, I didn't know the Eiffel Tower was that high, or oh my God, I'm looking at Napoleon's tomb, or they come running up to me, I actually spoke French in the restaurant and I got what I ordered. Is huge. And so it's the cultural piece, it's the linguistic piece, they're independent for the first time and they're figuring out how to use a subway in a foreign language. They're learning how to pay for something in a foreign language. They're buying postcards to send home and share that excitement with the people, with their family and with their friends is amazing to me.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah.
and that trip had the comments that I have gotten after the trip and for years to come from those students have been so positive. And recently, 2 years ago, we started doing an exchange. So on alternate years, so I do the week in Paris, and then every second year now we're going to do an exchange where we host 10 students from France, and then we travel to France. I travel with 10 students, and we stay with families and go to
Okay.
school.
Okay.
So that's coming up next month. I'll be leaving for France in a few weeks.
Oh, that's really
Um,
exciting.
so
So, do
exciting.
those 10 students, is it a direct exchange then with the families?
Yes.
Yeah, okay. Yeah,
Yeah.
my son did that with Germany when he
Uh,
was, which was really terrific. And when you go to Paris, do you stay in a hotel?
the Paris trip, we stay in a hotel.
Okay.
Yeah.
So they're totally different kinds of experiences,
Totally different experience. Yeah.
but both really worthwhile. Yeah.
Totally worthwhile.
Yeah.
And then I've also done 2 weekend immersion trips to Quebec with my seniors.
Oh,
It's kind
yeah.
of like, hey, you managed to make it through 7 years of French, and you can communicate in French. So we speak no English, and it's a weekend of like winter sports, snowshoeing, and dog sledding, and going to a sugar shack to make maple syrup. And that's very cold, but really, really fun.
That sounds like a blast. Can I come with you
So
next time?
fun. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, that's terrific. I've been to Quebec, but it's been a couple of years, and so that sounds really, really fun.
So fun.
Yeah, yeah. There's something about traveling, which is an education that you just can't get any other way.
No, no.
And it's so important for our young people to have the experience of meeting people from other countries. I mean, it's great when they can come here. Yes, that's huge. My family did AFS for several
Hmm.
years, actually, and that's huge. But there's nothing like immersing yourself in somebody else's culture and really trying to get by and figuring
Yeah,
out how to get yourself around. And I mean, even if it's just going to England, England is different than
it's different.
America.
It's different. Yeah, yep.
So, and to add the extra dimension of having to be able to communicate in another language is, well, it adds another dimension. It's just
It's a whole other dimension.
yeah,
It can
yeah,
be frustrating and it can be scary, and to overcome all of that and be successful at it is, I think, for a 16 or 17-year-old to come home and say, look at what I accomplished in only a week or only in 2 weeks for the exchange, is really a confidence booster, and they learn a lot about themselves through the process. And even ultimately, if they don't speak fluent French in 20 years, that experience is going to have made sort of an intangible impact on their growth.
Absolutely. Well, and it just gives them an idea. I mean, even having the opportunity to talk with people about politics,
Right. Right.
just to talk to somebody and say, well, how do you view American politics? How do you in France think of the government shutdown? You know,
Right. Right.
or to go over to France and ask real questions about their government and get a local Frenchman's perspective on it, and not just the textbook perspective.
And here, there's so many Americans who think that the French hate us. Oh, French hate Americans. And it's so not true.
Yeah.
And for students to go there and have these conversations and realize that there are times when they may not agree with what the government does, but they don't hate Americans, and that they actually are really curious about Americans and love to learn about Americans and want to talk to us, and is huge. And also the other stereotype that makes me crazy is that, oh, Parisians are rude. That it's a big city. I think that in any big city you will stumble upon people who are cranky. I think in
Everywhere.
New York there are, shopkeepers and people in restaurants are going to be cranky.
Yeah.
And when they deal with tourists who aren't necessarily making an effort to adapt to the new whatever culture or whatever language. And so my students to say, oh, the Parisians are really nice. Like, yes, please bring that home and share that, because it's a terrible stereotype that the Parisians are horrible people.
Well, and I can speak to that from my own experience many years ago when I was traveling, and I had just completed 5 years of French. Well, not just, but a few years before, I'd completed 5 years of French, and was traveling through France, and I found that when I made the effort to speak to them in French, they were so nice and so helpful.
Yes.
They really were.
Yeah.
So if they couldn't understand me, then why were they going to help me, I guess.
Right.
But if I made an effort, they were really terrific.
Exactly.
So, well, bringing it back to the U.S. classroom, what are some of the frustrations that you experience as a teacher? And I don't know, what kind of thoughts do you have about that?
There are, I think, sort of the general maybe the lack of understanding that we're working with human beings, and that a school is not a factory, and you can't always quantify by a standardized test or by numbers what kind of an impact we're having on students. With our new evaluation system, we're just starting a new evaluation system this year, and thinking about all of that is, measuring your student outcomes, and and making sure everyone makes progress. And I want my students to make progress, but I fear that in looking at only the numbers, that we're going to miss some of these intangible effects that we have on students, and that their growth may not able to be quantified by a percentage. And that, because of what I was saying before, all of the other things that students bring to the classroom, all that not every student every year may make the progress that we hope, because of the things that are impacting them outside of school. Right. So I'm hoping that there's some flexibility and taking that into account, because we're not mass producing a product. Our product is a human. So that is a frustration, because it's a frustration that in many places teachers are not respected for what we do. There's a lack of recognition of everything that goes into our job every day. It's extremely frustrating it was extremely frustrating to me when I met with the other teachers of the year from around the country, to hear the discrepancies between our schools, in terms of the resources that we have, in terms of the staffing that we have, and even within the state, the teachers that I've met within the state, that down to this, it depends on what your zip code is. And that in Sharon, we are really lucky to have the funds to do a lot of things, and in a few towns over, they don't have that. And it's the idea that funding for schools is primarily based on property tax, I think is really
There's a problem.
there's a problem. That there needs to be some way to equalize the opportunities that students get, so it doesn't matter where they live.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, there's something fundamentally wrong with our financing system, and I wish we could figure out a way to fix it.
yeah, and I'm not sure what it is.
That's why you and I are teachers and not politicians.
Right, right.
Yeah.
And super frustrating to me also that that the people who are making decisions about educational reform have never been in the classroom,
Hmm.
or many of them have not been in the classroom.
Right.
And in fact, what during my speech at the State House when I was accepting my award, I challenged lawmakers and business leaders to come and shadow teachers in the state, to see everything that goes into our jobs, to come to school in the morning, to stay through late at night while we're correcting papers and answering emails and going to special education review meetings and all of this. And no one took me up on that. And that
I'm
was really
shocked.
to me. Yeah, yeah.
Oh,
I think
yeah.
it's
Yeah.
easier. I think in some ways, I think it's easier for the people making the decisions not to know. Because if they knew, then they'd actually have to act. And I don't think the answers are easy. And I don't have the answers.
Right.
But I think that it would maybe open a dialogue if, and for of collaboration if,
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's the tough part is the answers are not easy, and it's easier not to know. Ignorance is bliss, I guess sometimes.
and I also I had to go to, at the end of the year, of last school year, I went to, in front of the executive board at the DOE to talk about, or DESC, to talk about the year in review, and there are no teachers on the Board of Education.
I'm shocked.
Yeah, there's a student. There's a student, but there are no teachers. And when I asked the woman who's in charge of the awards programs at the DESE,
Hmm.
why there are no teachers, she said, "Well, we asked about that a few years ago, and they said, well, if we had a teacher, we'd have to have a principal." I said, "Well, yeah, you should have a principal. You should have an administrator. You should have a teacher. And for God's sake, why are you have a student with voting rights and you don't have a teacher?" Um, which is also really kind of, yeah, leaves me without words.
Okay. I would say you've been very diplomatic. No, that's great. That's great. Now, one of the things in the survey that you replied to when I asked you this question was you wrote, it would be beneficial for teachers to take on administrative roles while still in the classroom and be valuable for administrators to continue to teach. Can you expand on that a little bit?
I think that it's this also being able to walk in the other shoes. I think there's a lot, we do a lot of complaining about administration, but we also don't know what goes into an administrator's job. They have a lot of pressures from the state. They have a lot of
Right.
pressures from the DOE, for every place. I think that, and I think that also as administrators get removed from their experiences in the classroom, they sometimes forget about what it's like to have a class. And I don't have this, but some of my colleagues have, a class of 25 kids, and 16 of them have IEPs, and they first kind of forget about what the needs are in the classroom. And I think that if there were less of a barrier between administrators and teachers, and there was more of a fluid back and forth where administrators were continuing to teach to keep current with what's going on in the classroom, and if teachers could be in administrative shoes to bring their classroom expertise and experience, kind of to see what kind of walls administrators walk into, there may be that collaboration to make some collaborative decision making, that where both sides are bringing their expertise to the
Yeah,
table.
yeah. I think that's a great idea. I think it's a great idea.
And I think there are a lot of teachers, I have an administrative degree, but I don't want to give up the classroom. And I think a lot of good teachers still want to have the interaction with students, but I wouldn't mind having some administrative duties for part of the day,
Okay.
maybe, and to be able to get to do a little of both
Yeah.
would make a more well-rounded, for me, would make a more well-rounded day, maybe.
Okay. No, but I like that idea too of putting yourself in the other person's shoes because I think it does go both ways. So that was a really interesting way to look at it. So thanks for sharing that. Um, One of the things that is always interesting to know is how have you learned from some of your early mistakes? Early in the year. What are some, or early in your career in particular? What are some of the things that you figured out as you went along and made better?
Um, One of the stories that I always tell is my third year of teaching. So the first 2 years that I taught, I didn't have any honors classes,
Hmm.
and so my third year teaching, I had my first honors class. I'm like, "Woo, I have an honors class!" And it was a group of students who I had as freshmen my first year teaching, and we'd had a great relationship because um, freshman language classes at that time were multi-level. So it was after that they merged, that they split into honors and standard level. So
Okay.
it was this group of kids who I had as freshmen who were now going to be in my honors class. I was so excited, and they were excited. And I remember the first day them kind of running down, like, "Oh, we're so excited to be in this class," and it was a disaster. Um, the first, not the whole year, but the first month was miserable. I remember going home every day and just bashing my head against the wall, saying, "I don't understand. They're not speaking French. They're not having fun. This is terrible. They complain about everything," and we were making no progress. And I just kept saying, I felt like I was trying to do different things, but I kept saying to myself, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong?" And I would say to other people, "What's wrong? What's wrong? What's wrong?"
Hmm.
And finally, one day, they're like, "Wait a minute. The only way I'm going to know what's wrong is if I ask them what's
Right.
wrong." So I went into, I think it was late September, early October, because it was before Parents' Night. And I went into the room. I sat on a desk and I said, "Okay, we're going to speak English today." And they kind of looked at me and said, "Whoa, whoa, is everything okay?" So, I was so excited about this year to start and to have you guys again. And I felt like that feeling was mutual. And I don't know what's been going on for the past month. You don't speak French. You're not doing your homework. You're not. And they kind of looked at me and I said, "So I want to know from your perspective, what's not going well."
Right.
I said, "There are things that I can change. If I know that it's a problem, there are things that I can't change. Like you can't say I don't want you to speak French anymore because that's not an option."
Right.
And they ended up being so honest and constructive about what I had set expectations, that I was thinking honors class, they're going to be able to handle all of this stuff, and they couldn't. And I had totally misgauged
Hmm.
what their ability was. And for them to be able to say, when you do this, and they were so not nasty about it, they said, "Well, when you do this, we just really don't understand it." And then I said, "Well, why didn't anyone ever raise their hand and say, I don't know what's going on?" They're like, "Well, we were kind of afraid because we wanted to just," like, oh my God. So, and it was, I mean, we had the year was not completely smooth, but we had opened a path of communication where they could say to me, "You're going too quickly," or "I don't understand this. Can you slow down?" And it made it so that we managed to get through the rocky parts by this level of communication
Hmm.
that we established. And I remember on Parents' Night that one of the dads came in and said that his son had come home and said that he was so happy that I had taken the time to hear what they had to say and make changes based on what they had to say. And so I think that has kind of been back to the respect from the beginning of this conversation, like letting students know that I will listen to them and ask for their input and ask and periodically say, like, "How's this going? Are you understanding this?" And I do little surveys now, and at the end of the year I do surveys to get that feedback, and I make changes from it because students have a lot to say, and they have made really good suggestions, whether it be how I present something or how I review something. And I think they have really helped to shape me be a better teacher.
I think it's so important to empower students to, um, as much as possible. It's not, it can't be complete, but as much
It
as
can be complete.
possible
Yeah.
to take charge of their own learning and to learn about things that are interesting to them, to bring their own world into the classroom. And it sounds like what you did and what you learned from that was really being able to give the kids the voice that they need in order to say, this is my learning and this is what I need to get out of it, and let's communicate better. And
Yeah.
that's a great story. I love that story. It
So
increases
that,
their personal investment.
it totally, yes, exactly.
Yeah.
And it makes them, I think I also, through the years, have students have said to me, I'm so much more willing to participate in your class than in other classes because you know, I validate what they say
Hmm.
and I sort of celebrate even if they're saying something very basic in French, like, yeah, I said something. So I think that that validation and that of them as students and as people really helps the learning process and the
Yeah.
teaching process.
Yeah. Yeah. That's great. Well, let's just end up by asking if there's one thing that you would like to share with other teachers that you think makes the biggest difference in students' lives. Let's say you've got a couple of new teachers who come to you and say, "Hey, I need you to just kind of mentor me a little bit. What are one or two things that I can really focus on that will make me a great teacher?"
Oh boy. So I do run new teacher orientation at school.
Oh,
Uh,
okay. Yeah, but
um,
now I'm asking for a couple of sentences instead of 3 weeks worth, right?
I know, I know. I think recognize creating personal relationships with students is first and foremost. Being organized is huge. If you don't go into a classroom organized and knowing your stuff, kids aren't going to respect you, and you're going to lose control. Um, and be willing to admit when you make mistakes and be willing to kind of hit the reset button because it's never too late to make changes.
Okay.
Um, so I think that's and have fun. Have fun because it is the greatest job, and I would want teachers to be able to go into a classroom every day saying I love this.
Hmm.
um, so I think that's all.
That's great. That's great. Well, thank you so much, Kathy, for chatting with us today. I think we learned a lot of terrific things. It's been wonderful to talk to a foreign language teacher so we can bring in the whole cultural aspect of things. That was really important, I think. And we wish you all the best in the rest of this year.
Thank you very much.
Okay, thanks.
Okay, bye bye.